Welcome, one and all, to episode number 3 of the American Hotspur podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be sounding off on the Club World Cup. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please do be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're watching on Spotify, please do be sure to follow and give it 5 stars. It was a lot more upsetting to me than I initially thought it was going to be, but it was an entertaining product, giving them an even further advantage over the massive advantage that they already have over the Argentinian clubs. And it's insulting that the tickets are this expensive. And we'll get to a little bit about Infantino's blatant omission of the fact that that was an issue. No! That's what's special about the sport. That, well, one of the thousands of things that's unique about the sport. Okay. So I'm going to start this episode off by just giving an in-advance apology because it's going to be extremely tangential, a little bit off the rails, and as you will have known from the intro, that this is going to be sounding off on the Club World Cup, which was a lot more upsetting to me than I initially thought it was going to be. If you'll remember from episode 1, I talked about how I thought it was an entertaining product at the very least in its inception. But as the tournament went on, and as I read more about it, as I heard more people talk about it, I just became a little bit more upset with the whole idea of it. And again, in that first episode, I did say that I wanted it to be a failure. Like, going into it, I had so many reservations about player welfare, about the morality behind the whole thing, about what it was going to mean if it were a success. And there's still some writing on the wall. There's still some topics to be talked about. There's still a lot of things that are up in the air about it. But by all accounts, it seemed to be, at least from the standpoint of FIFA and Infantino in particular, it seemed to be a glowing success. And again, it is for not the right reasons. I think anything that is a success in the mind of Infantino, you should be extremely scared of. Anything that is a success in the mind of a mega billionaire, borderline totalitarian in the organization that he runs, you should be scared of them considering that a success in their eyes. So if that little tangent that I just went on to introduce the episode is anything to go off of, if you're upset by any of that, go. Like, I don't care. This is something that I need to get off my chest. It's something that's massive in the world of football, and it happened more or less, for all intents and purposes, in my backyard. So I'm going to have a lot to talk about with it. I guess to get onto a more positive note, I will start by talking about some of the positives of it. As I said, it was unfortunately entertaining. There were some great storylines. There were certain teams that had some very interesting tactical talking points. You think of a team like Chelsea and Enzo Maresca, who really went bold in having sort of a new tactical identity, or at least tweaking their system to be a little bit more flexible and be very entertaining while they were at it. You talk about like Real Madrid and seeing what Xabi Alonso, his vision in terms of what this Real Madrid side could be. You talk about, of course, PSG, who have been one of the most entertaining teams in the world over the past 12 months or so, or at least since the latter half of the Champions League. Teams like Mamelodi Sundowns, who came into it playing this really expansive style of football when they were one of, the quote-unquote minnows, which, again, we'll get into what that really means. I have a separate talking point, a separate part of the episode that's going to be dedicated to why that's not exactly the case. But it was an entertaining product, and even, some of the games were absolutely fascinating, like Al Hilal versus Manchester City, like the Inter Miami versus FC Porto game. There was the Al Ahly game against FC Porto as well that was extremely entertaining. Palmeiras taking it all the way until the final moments against, I think it was Botafogo. So again, there were some really high points in terms of just the football entertainment aspect of it, in terms of some of the tactical talking points that there were to be had. I think that there was really value in that, and getting to see the teams from across the globe facing off against each other. How does the South American, or at least Brazilian samba style of football interact against some of the biggest clubs in Europe? We saw Botafogo in that massive upset against PSG and making it out of a group that contained PSG and Atletico Madrid. Again, there were some really, really bright moments from this tournament. I think the team seemed to really take it seriously. Like we talked about, Enzo Maresca tweaking his tactical system to get the most out of every individual performance. PSG seemed to treat this like a second Champions League final in the final of the Club World Cup. Um, the idea is a potentially timeless one. Like on paper, the idea of having the biggest clubs in the world from every corner of the globe given the opportunity to clash against one another, having a semi-professional team at the tournament facing off against clubs like Bayern Munich, Boca Juniors, and Benfica, who are some of the biggest clubs across the entirety of the football landscape on the globe, on the planet. That is, on paper, again, that's something that all football fans can salivate over. It was, again, on its face in terms of the idea, in terms of what it could mean and how it could represent a growing facet of football ideology. It's awesome to think about, but in its execution is a little bit different. And again, I'm just going to talk about the positives for now. Congratulations to Chelsea, a relative underdog story. I don't know if you can talk about a team who spent £1.5 billion over the course of 4 transfer windows as an underdog. I think that's a little bit disingenuous, but in terms of expectation going into the tournament and expectation going into the final, no less, facing off against the world's most dominant team and making them look limp and lifeless in that final, it was I guess a nice storyline for, if I'm removing the Tottenham bias from myself. And again, sort of looking past the fact that they've spent the GDP of a medium-sized nation over the course of 4 transfer windows. I will willingly look past that to just say that it was a very intriguing storyline, talking about the new signings coming in and making an instant impact, showing that some of their investment isn't so wild and reckless. And again, the tactical element that Enzo Maresca brought to it and how he sort of changed his system up depending on the opponent, that was really interesting, really unique, and something that I really enjoyed personally. And that I think a lot of football fans, apart from those within London, can hang their hats on and say that it was, something that was worthwhile. And watching PSG completely dismantle Real Madrid was at least somewhat satisfying, especially if you're Barcelona biased. But I think that's about all I can come up with for positives. And getting into the issues that I have with this tournament, we're going to start off with one of the talking points and one of the apologetic standpoints towards this tournament was, well, it's giving the smaller nations an opportunity to build wealth and to get some much needed prize money and investment from FIFA. And while that's vaguely true, like there was the Auckland City, they received, I think it was like over 600% of their normal revenue in prize money from this tournament. And what sounded like a negative was that the New Zealand FA stepped in and said, you know what, we're going to take some of this prize money since you're a semi-professional team, and we're going to invest that money more evenly across the landscape of New Zealand football to try and grow the game in our country. I think that's an amazing standpoint to have from New Zealand, and it's something that could potentially change the course of history for football in that country, and even the amount of prize money that Auckland City received after the distribution of the wealth to the other New Zealand football clubs and to the rest of New Zealand football in terms of expanding the sport across their country. That's incredible. That really shouldn't be overlooked because it was incredible. Now, the problem that I have with it, if you look at the teams that were in this tournament, okay, so we're talking about, one of the lesser known teams coming into this tournament was Mamelodi Sundowns, and some of the people looking at it from the outside in were saying like, hey, they got to play against some of the biggest clubs in the world, they got to grow their brand name, and they got this nice prize money that's helping a smaller club grow and helping them become a bigger club and injecting themselves a little bit more forcefully into the broader footballing landscape. And while that is partially true, they gained a ton of exposure from this tournament. I saw a couple of documentaries about their club and the success of their club leading into the tournament that opened certainly my eyes to a new part of the football world that I wasn't really familiar with before. And they have a fan in me, certainly, although I am wearing the Kaiser Chiefs hat. Sorry to any Mamelodi Sundowns fans that definitely aren't watching this. But the issue with even a club like them is that they've won the last 8 South African League titles in a row. This is a team that is already completely dominant in South African football and that just lost the African Champions League final. So it's not a minnow level club. This is the richest club in South Africa, and they received the cash injection to further broaden the gap between them and the next closest South African club. I think they won the league this year by like over 10 points. So it's not as if the gap is even close, and they're broadening that gap even further. And then, okay, so the other conversation was, well, look at the Brazilian clubs. They're getting a much needed injection. Brazil is the most dominant nation in South America. Apart from their national team, who has been flopping at every major tournament, they have won all of the last 100 Copa Libertadores. They are completely dominating the landscape of South American club football, and they were the only South American nation to make the knockout of this tournament. There were 4 Brazilian clubs that made the knockout rounds of this tournament. 0 Argentinian clubs made it past the group phase. So that, again, that's broadening the gap. And if you even look at the the Brazilian clubs that made the knockout round, it was Palmeiras, it was Botafogo, it was Fluminense, and it was Flamengo. Each of those clubs, I know for a fact at least 2 of those clubs have won the Copa Libertadores in the last 4 years. And I want to say that Flamengo has won it in that time as well. Don't quote me on that, but I'm certain that Botafogo and Fluminense were already 2 of the dominant sides in Brazil at this point. I know Fluminense had a little bit of a downturn over the last couple of years since winning the Copa Libertadores, but you get what I'm talking about. And Botafogo just received a ridiculous amount of outside investment. They're the richest club in Brazil now, and you're talking about them as a small club receiving much needed investment. That's not at all what was happening. So we look at some of the other underdog stories from this tournament. Okay, Al Hilal beat Manchester City, an incredible story in this tournament. That was certainly an underdog and upset story. They are a state-owned club in the richest nation in the world. They have the richest investment group of any club in the entire world. Think about that. That is not an underdog story. That is not a small club receiving much needed investment. That is an already rich club becoming even richer. And it's not even like the money is going to the club. It's going to the Saudi state, who are just going to spread that wealth between the other 4 clubs in Saudi Arabia that get this ridiculous amount of investment every summer. Come on now. This is not small clubs receiving much needed investment. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about the teams that made the knockout stages. The quarterfinal, it was Bayern Munich versus PSG, the most successful club in Germany in the history of forever, against a club that has a monopoly on French football and just won the Champions League. I think in terms of private investment, the richest football club in the world, apart from state-owned clubs. The richest. And I guess they're technically state-owned as well. But in terms of outside investment, they are the richest football club in the world. And like I said, they have a monopoly on French football. Nobody can touch them in terms of investment in France. And in the world, they are most seasons the highest spenders in the world. And they made the final. They got the second most amount of prize money in the tournament. That's not a small club receiving much needed investment. On the other side of that bracket in the quarterfinal, you had Borussia Dortmund. Okay, they're a club that's had financial struggles recently. Them making it out of the group phase and then making it to the quarterfinal was a great storyline. It's going to help them a lot in terms of trying to battle Bayern Munich for the Bundesliga title, which they've fallen out of over the last, I think it's been almost 10 years now since they've since they've won the Bundesliga title, and then they obviously challenged for it within the last few years. But over the past, I think, 2 seasons, they've been nowhere near it, and other clubs have come much closer to them. You think of like your Bayer Leverkusens and a club like Eintracht Frankfurt finishing 3rd. They have really fallen short of the mark in that investment, and that prize money is certainly going to do a lot for them. But the team that they were playing, it was Real Madrid, the most successful club in Europe, one of the most popular clubs in the entirety of the world. Do you think that they need further investment? Do you think that they were foaming at the mouth because they're not going to be able to sign the next Galactico if they don't get this prize money? They've already spent a ridiculous amount of money in this transfer window. They signed the highest profile football player in the world last window, and they received the 4th highest amount of prize money in the entire tournament. Yes, the smallest clubs in the tournament are receiving much needed investment. That's exactly what's happening. Okay, the other side of the bracket in the quarterfinal. You had Chelsea against Palmeiras. We already talked about that was the semifinal. It was crud, I can't remember. It was Chelsea against another Brazilian club, and then it was Al Hilal. Again, we talked about them, a Saudi state-owned club. They are unfathomably wealthy. They can spend any amount of money that they want to at any given moment. We don't need to talk about that any further. Coming up against Palmeiras in the quarterfinal. Again, an already relatively successful Brazilian club that is broadening the power gap in South American football by giving them an even further advantage over the massive advantage that they already have over the Argentinian clubs. And I know that, of course, there's other clubs that are in contention for the Copa Libertadores, but it's always coming down to Argentinian clubs versus Brazilian clubs. So that's it. And then Chelsea, we didn't even get on to them. Chelsea, the team that won the tournament, they have spent more money in the last 4 transfer windows than any club in the world. They can practically throw money at anything that they want, and they will get it. So that's the small club getting much needed prize money. And we could go even further. We could say, okay, the MLS clubs, the team, the nation that hosted the tournament, it's not like the MLS is a poor league. It has so much billionaire investment. It's like the 4th richest sports league in the United States. And if you're not from the United States, maybe you're not aware, there's a ton of money going into sports in this country. It's ridiculous. It is completely ridiculous. And the only club that made the knockout round, the club that received the highest amount of prize money from this tournament, was the richest club in the country. It was Inter Miami, the richest and most popular and most commercially successful club in the country, was the only club that made the knockout round and got the highest amount of prize money from the tournament. Again, small clubs getting much needed prize money that's going to help them invest in the future. Save me from this conversation, because that's not at all what's going on. It's just broadening the already existing power gaps that exist everywhere in world football. And that's going to be a continuing problem for this tournament, because the teams that are winning the trophies that are required to make the tournament in the first place, yeah, you'll get an Auckland City here and there, but the teams that are winning these tournaments are already mega successful clubs. Maybe we'll get an underdog run in the Asian Champions League or in the African Champions League that will open it up to a different contender, to a club that really needs the investment. But even like Red Dragons, Urawa Reds, they were the club that represented, or one of the clubs that represented the Asian Champions League in this tournament. They are, to my knowledge, they are one of, you know what, I'm going to look this up right now. We're already on a tangent. I'm going to go ahead and look this up. Winningest clubs in the Asian Champions League. So it's Al Hilal, who we already talked about. Urawa Red Diamonds. They are the second most successful club in the history of the Asian Champions League. Again, it's a nice little underdog story. I love the project that's going on there over in Japan in terms of expanding football. We've seen it unfold in how much more successful they've been at the recent World Cups. They've been doing a lot for women's football in their country as well. I love to see it, but it's not like they're an underdog story coming into this tournament. Again, spare me from this stupid conversation, because that's not at all what's going on. Another issue that I have with this tournament, we'll move on from that, because, and this is all going to be super tangential, because another issue that I have with this tournament, all of the global commentary surrounding football fans or fans of football in the United States was that we are just going to be so delighted to have the biggest clubs in the world in our backyard. This is such a big opportunity. Most of the fans of football in this country are casuals anyway. It's going to be great for broadcasting revenue. And that's just like, that's so diminutive, that's so diminishing to fans like myself who tune into football around the world on a regular basis, who are already well versed on the majority of the clubs that are coming into this tournament. And it's insulting that the tickets are this expensive. And I remember I was looking at the ticket prices for Manchester City against whoever the Egyptian club was that they were playing. This was in the middle of the day. And these were tickets that were like 10 rows up. These aren't even great seats for the stadium that it was in. It was $5,000 for tickets to this game. and you want to talk about the passionate fans being able to express their love for the sport, it's a celebrity suck fest is all it is. It's just a bunch of people who already have the money to go see whatever sporting event in this country that they want, spending all of that money to get these tickets and to take a bunch of pictures for their Instagram and Snapchat stories. That's all that it was. And yes, of course, as the tournament grew on, you start to see more of the passionate fans for the games that were American clubs playing in them. You saw a lot of that representation. I think particularly Seattle Sounders had an incredible local fan turnout. Inter Miami had, obviously they have a much broader global reach, but they also had a significant turnout in terms of fans coming to see them specifically. But my God, like, it's just insulting. It's like you're looking at us and saying like, you don't know anything about this anyway. It's like you're taking an elementary school kid to the aquarium who is already a genius when it comes to aquatic science and saying like, well, he's just an elementary school kid. He's going to love this. But then he's talking about the animal rights issues with the fish that are in the tanks and how the cramped space isn't good for the environment and it's stressing them out. Like, that's what it is. You're basically looking at us and saying, well, they're just kids. They're just kids. They don't care about the moral issues of the tournament. They don't care that the ad revenue and the way that the ads are being done for this tournament is completely against everything that the rest of football is about. And it's a joke to the establishment of the sport. They don't care about that because the sport's being played in their backyard. Even just ignoring the fact that for the majority of the group stage, the majority of the fans that were showing up for these games were just the fans coming from their own countries to see their teams play in the tournament. It wasn't a massive turnout of American fans coming to see the biggest clubs in the tournament. And yeah, for your like Real Madrids and your Manchester Cities, your Inter Milans, like these clubs probably had a very high percentage of American fans turn out for those games. But it's just super insulting. It's incredibly insulting. And the fact that the tickets were as expensive as they were, it's so tone deaf to some of the issues happening in the United States as well. We've been fighting a labor rights issue, a workers' rights issue in this country for decades now. And you're basically telling us like, hey, we're going to host these games at 11 a.m. during the workday when you've already planned your 2-week vacation for the summer. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? That's not giving an opportunity to the common American fan. That's not doing any of that. That's not doing any of that at all. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Again, just the global commentary around the American audience for this is so insulting. And yeah, they're probably right about a lot of it. They're probably right about a lot of the fans viewing it because I know a ton of people who don't know anything about football who have come to me and asked me about this tournament and seemed really excited about the premise of it. So it's probably right in a lot of ways. But for people like me who are, as you can tell by the tone of my voice talking about this, so deeply passionate about this sport, it's insulting. It's a slap in the face. It's a punch to the mouth. Issue number 3. Really strange decisions. I talked about it a little bit with some of the other issues. Really strange decisions in terms of location, time of year, kickoff times, some of the performative aspects of it. Again, I'll get into some more of that in more detail in a little bit here. But yeah, it was just really strange that the games were being played just because I think part of it I heard was because they wanted, like the earlier kickoffs was because they wanted it to be accessible across all time zones. I totally understand that. But then you have the aspect of it, like, you know, if you're playing at noon in southern Florida, it's going to be 1,000,000 degrees. And players were like having issues with like heat stroke and recovery because they weren't used to the temperatures here in the United States in the middle of the summer. That was a really strange choice. I get why they did it so that they could make sure that the players don't have a holiday, and so that it doesn't interrupt any of the other tournaments, and so that Infantino can buy another yacht at the end of the year. I totally get that was the whole point of this tournament in the first place. But yeah, it was really weird. It was really inconvenient, even for people who weren't trying to go to the games, people like myself who work a job and have to make money to be able to survive. You know, people like us who want to watch those games but can't because, you know, kickoff for Real Madrid versus who was the club that they were playing? You get what I'm saying. Kickoff for one of the more intriguing games of the tournament was at 11:30 a.m. in the middle of the week on a Wednesday. When most people are just getting their kids to school and heading off to their 9 to 5s. That was a pretty strange decision if you wanted people to actually show up and watch the games. And you could see the evidence of that. Like I remember watching the Monterrey versus Inter Milan game. The turnout for that game I think it was the first or second. It was the first game of that group. The turnout was incredible, and it was because it was hosted in the evening when most people are not at work doing the things that they need to do to survive, and not having to work the entire month before that to be able to afford the ticket for the game. That's when you're going to get more of a turnout for those things. And we'll get to a little bit about Infantino's blatant omission of the fact that was an issue. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we'll talk about, we'll go on to the final. The actual football was great. I was, the early goal from Chelsea, I was genuinely stunned. And then just watching how Chelsea was able to control the game, it went exactly how they were intending it to go. PSG barely had any chances of note. You had at the beginning of the second half, there was the save by Robert Sanchez, and then from one of the resulting corners, there was the clearance from Joao Pedro. But other than that, there was really not much to note from a PSG perspective. I thought the mid-block that Chelsea employed, and it was incredible. Pedro Neto played an interesting role in this game. He was tasked with basically man-marking Achraf Hakimi when Chelsea didn't have the ball, and it really mitigated his normal threat in attack. That was one of the things that has challenged teams up to this point, and the way that PSG have been able to create a ton of their chances was from those really dynamic runs that Achraf Hakimi was making from deep, struggling to mark a right back who is drifting into the same positions as where a striker would normally be. They mitigated that by Pedro Neto just breathing down his neck the entire game. Cole Palmer played a little bit of a different role, playing in that right wing spot. There was a ton of different rotations, and I think with Joao Pedro playing at striker, they were able to rotate positions a lot more easily, which unsettled the PSG press. Their ability to play those long balls up the right hand channel, and whether it was Malo Gusto getting onto the end of it and creating chances for Cole Palmer cutting inside, or whether that was Cole Palmer running into space and then not being picked up, they really identified Beraldo as a weak point in that defense. They were really lacking that recovery pace without William Pacho in the lineup. So it was a tactical mastery from Enzo Maresca, which I think really, I saw some comments and some commentary about the final where people were saying people are going to think that Chelsea is a contender for the Champions League and the Premier League now. That's not at all it. It was a fluke game. I completely disagree. I think it was a tactical masterclass from Enzo Maresca, and it really gave teams the blueprint for if Luis Enrique doesn't make major adjustments going forward, how you can potentially unsettle this PSG team. And again, I think Enzo Maresca, I mentioned this in the earlier parts of the episode, Enzo Maresca did a really good job of making tactical adjustments throughout the tournament, and you could tell when Joao Pedro finally arrived that he was really excited to have him because of what it allows them to do tactically. It allows them to rotate in certain areas of the pitch and unsettle the press in the back line. It gives them the option to go long more often. It gives them the option to commit overloads in those wide spaces a lot more often, and that really was on full display in the latter half of this tournament. So well done to Chelsea, because if you're somebody who is a little bit of a tactico like myself, I wouldn't consider myself a full-on tactico, but somebody who really enjoys picking up on those little nuances of the game, Chelsea were the team to watch in this tournament. Of course, everybody was talking about PSG and how I compared them to the 2016 Warriors for my American sports fans, but they met their Cavaliers in this final. They met their LeBron James, and that was Enzo Maresca and his tactical ingenuity. That was Cole Palmer and his ability to read space and recognize where the weak points in the opposition are. So well done to Chelsea. The actual football that was on display in the final was really fun to watch, and I thought that the storyline that developed from it, like I said, the tactical ingenuity that Enzo Maresca displayed was genuinely beautiful, and it was very pleasing on the eye. And it was something that I don't think anybody expected going into the final. However, Everything else, apart from the actual football on display, was a complete joke. It was a joke. It was stand-up comedy without the actual laughs. It was like, I don't mean to rag on him too much, but, I'm not even going to make that for, because you'll see why. But, like, you had this Super Bowl-style halftime show, and my question was, like, who was that for? Who was actually... Who is the intended target audience for this? Because the way that they set it up, and I will say, full disclosure, I didn't actually watch the halftime show. I was doing a marketing event for my internship at the time, so I watched the first half, turned it off for the halftime show, turned it back on for the second half. But I did see it after the fact. And the way that they had the performance set up, it was clearly only intended for the broadcast. I think they were trying to like avoid some of the issues with like they had to keep the pitch constantly watered because it was 1,000,000 degrees outside and they were playing with natural grass. So like I think that was part of it, but it seemed like it was only made for the broadcast. And again, my question is, the broadcast, it had a very wide global audience. Global football fans don't want a halftime show in the middle of their football game. They don't want that. And it was Doja Cat, who is an American celebrity by all accounts. I wouldn't consider Doja Cat a global celebrity. Maybe she is, and I'm just not into global pop culture. But, like, I have nothing against Doja Cat. I'm going to have a Kanye West moment here. But, like, I like Doja Cat. What the hell does she know about football? What the hell does she know about the global football audience? Like, when it comes to, like, the World Cup shows that they've had in the past with like somebody like Shakira, she is an avid football fan who has a worldwide, every corner of the globe knows who Shakira is. I would highly doubt that is the case with Doja Cat anywhere outside of the United States. So that was bizarre in and of itself. And then there was the fact that the halftime show took up about 25 minutes rather than the traditional 15. So again, who is this for? Because like people like myself, right? Who, one of the reasons that some of the American audience likes football as opposed to other sports in the United States is because there's not ad breaks. The halftime is 15 minutes flat. There's a minimal amount of ads in that halftime. You get, a good portion of it is genuine analysis about the game that's going on. And then you have 15 minutes of halftime. It's 45 minutes of football, 15 minutes 45 minutes of football. And that's part of what I love about football is that when I go to watch American football, for example, I watch 30 seconds of actual sports and then I get an ad break and then I watch another 15 seconds of football and then an ad break, so on and so forth. And then 10 minutes of commercial between quarters, 25 minutes of commercials between the halves. And then like if you're talking about NBA in basketball, the freaking tip-offs are 40 minutes late because of the betting odds and because of the ads that they want to make sure that they just absolutely positively have to get in there. Otherwise, they'll die. Everybody involved will die if they don't get these gambling and alcohol ads in there. If they're not able to market gambling to children, they will die. That's the reason that we prefer football, a lot of us, to other sports, is because it's sports, 15 minutes, and more sports. And then you have this halftime show where it's like a 10-minute performance, 15 minutes of ads, and then the game starts late. All the players are clearly confused as to like they're coming out of the tunnel 15 minutes after going into the tunnel, and then they're like, what the hell is Doja Cat doing here? Why is she here? So that was really weird. Again, who was that for? Because the genuine genuine fans of football in America watch it, at least in my opinion, and to some of the people that I've talked to, they like the original format where there's limited breaks in the action. And then also like the ad placement in this tournament where you literally have breaks in the actual broadcast for ads. You have the game going on and then it minimizes the screen and then there's an ad for Budweiser. I don't know if they were one of the actual sponsors for the tournament, but you get what I'm saying. We're watching football, you're hearing the commentators talk, and then all of a sudden the commentator stops talking, the screen is minimized, the game goes into the right-hand corner of the screen, and then there's an ad. That was weird. I get why they do it because, like, Infantino, he needs another vacation home in Bali, right? Like, he needs that, and we need to make sure that he has that and that his ambassadors are getting paid enough money to agree with him on everything. We need that. But again, like, it just goes so far away from the traditional aspects of football, and why it's a dangerous level of Americanization that you have for this tournament. And I just wonder, like, I saw it on a lot of social media platforms. You had people watching it. DAZN was the streaming sponsor, the lifetime streaming sponsor for the FIFA Club World Cup. So many international fans were like, why is there an ad in the middle of my football? Why is there an ad in the middle of the game? And like, Americans were literally having to explain to them that, like, hey, if you watch sports in the United States, you're actually watching more ads than you are watching sports. You're watching more BetMGM than you are basketball. You're watching more Bud Light than you are the Patriots versus the Bears. And it's just like, what level of ad placement and sponsorship do we need in this thing? Who is this for? I can imagine that, like, it's like Infantino, and again, we're going to get into this in a little bit. Infantino will be so willing to ignore some of the obvious problems with this tournament simply because it's making a lot of money, and because like the lifetime broadcast deal that they have is so large in terms of revenue. The ad sponsorships that they have are so large, and he's banking on the fact that because the biggest clubs in the world are playing in this tournament, people are going to tune in, no matter how many problems they have with the fact that there's a Budweiser ad in the middle of the game, literally breaking up the game to put a Budweiser ad in it, American football style. People are willing to, majority of them are willing to forego that so that they can watch Real Madrid play PSG in 4 years' time, and catch some of the biggest clubs in the world play to decide who is the best club in the world. And it's just frustrating that it's going to succeed no matter what, and you're going to always have these problems that people are always going to point out, but nothing's ever going to be done about them because Infantino needs another pet tiger for his private-owned zoo. And I know that he needs that, and I know that that's something that like has to be accommodated. It just has to be, that has to happen. But that's it. That's just it. That's all that it's there for. And like, it was so funny listening to the Athletic FC talking about the Club World Cup, because they were basically saying that, like, yeah, the people tuning into this who don't know anything about football or who maybe are more casual fans of the sport, they'll just think that this is just like any other sport. Like, this is just how football is. And like, if they were to catch a game of Liverpool versus Manchester United in the Premier League, that yeah, there'd be an ad in the middle of the game. No. That's what's special about the sport. That, well, one of the thousands of things that's unique about the sport. This is one of the things that we just can't afford to Americanize about the sport. It's ridiculous. It's so absurd. Another thing that was just like, who is this for? Trump's incessant presence in the broadcast, and we'll get on to the to his appearance in the trophy lifting. You could have even named it the Trump trophy, the way that he was standing there. But like, who was it for? Because I would wager, right? If you think about Trump's audience, the people that are diehard Trumpers, a farmer in rural Arkansas, what are the odds that they were tuning into this game? What are the odds that the beet farmer in southern Arkansas, who barely has a Wi-Fi connection, what are the odds that that guy was sitting down at 2 p.m. in the middle of the workday to watch the Club World Cup and is literally peeing his pants because Donald Trump is on the screen? What are the odds that that's a thing? Like, his diehard audience is not sitting there tuning into this game for any reason, right? Like the oil rig worker on the East Coast, he is not tuning in to the Club World Cup final. Who was that for? It was for Infantino. And yes, I know that he needs to have like his billionaire friends at the tournament, and he needs to always have like these global political leaders. Sorry about my cat. He needs to have these global political leaders there so that he can afford to take his vacation trips to the most expensive places in the world for 2 months. He needs to have that. Like, that has, football fans should be blessed that he's considering that. Because it's so important for the sport. But apart from Infantino, really, who was that for? And every time that the screen at the game had Donald Trump on it. You just hear the ringing of boos. And again, this isn't like, I'm not trying to make a political commentary about the American right and the problems with it. That's not what I'm here for. But it's clear that nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted to see that. And especially the global audience. Like, again, so tone deaf. The rest of the world, you want to go to Canada right now and ask anybody on the street how they feel about Donald Trump. Go to Mexico right now and ask anybody on the street how they feel about Donald Trump. Go to Denmark, go to Belgium, Switzerland. Ask any of these countries, anybody on the street how they feel about Donald Trump, and it's not going to be positive. I'm not saying that because I want to make a commentary about Donald Trump. I'm saying that because global football fans do not like him. And even the clearly the local ones did not like him because every time he was on screen, he was booed. When the American flag came up for the national anthem, there were boos coming around the entire stadium. The entire stadium. When he was taking pictures with the referees, boos, audible boos were coming from the entire stadium. Again, I am not saying anything about Donald Trump or my political stance or his political stance. I don't give a crap about that in this discussion right now. That has nothing to do with this. I'm just saying that it was so pointless. It was so stupid. Yeah, he's the president of the country. He should be there. It makes sense for him to be there. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But the pure presence, the pure media show that was put on for Donald Trump being at the Club World Cup, a guy that couldn't tell you what the offside rule is in football. Who is that for? Who cares? Who cares? Genuinely. Who is sitting there watching this game, whether they were in the stadium or whether they were watching it on the broadcast, who was sitting there just thinking, man, I can't wait. I just can't wait. I am foaming at the mouth for the moment that Donald Trump comes onto my screen. I cannot wait for that. Again, the corn farmer in Southern Illinois was not tuning into the Club World Cup. That's his voter base. There's nothing against those people. I lived on one of those farms for years. Those people are amazing people. I have nothing against them. But I promise you, if I went to Scott and Denise's house right now, they did not watch the Club World Cup. I promise. I promise. So who was that for? And then the trophy lifting, that aspect of it. You have the Chelsea players all waiting to lift this trophy, and they literally have to delay the lifting of the trophy, and you can hear it in the commentary. The moment where the trophy would normally be lifted, the commentator has to delay his commentary of that moment because Donald Trump is shoulder to shoulder with the player. I can't remember. I think it was Enzo Fernandez maybe that was lifting the trophy, who was the captain on the pitch at the time. He's practically shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump. And literally Cole Palmer has to go up to him and be like, hey, are you going to move out of the way so we can do the thing that we're literally here to do? Like, even if you look back at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, the Qatari president, yeah, he was on the stage at the time of the trophy lifting, but you didn't see him in any of the photos of them lifting the trophy. You saw him handing out the trophy to the players that won it. That's totally fine. He's the president of the country that has hosted this tournament. That's fine. If Donald Trump was there just congratulating the players and being in the photos for the handing out of the trophy, or of the medals rather, the handing out of the medals before they walk up to the podium and lift the trophy, that is totally fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you are standing front and center when they're lifting this trophy. This moment is not about you. It has nothing to do with you. You can, in a majority of the photos that were taken before they started and during the trophy lifting, you can see Reece James, Cole Palmer, Mark Cucurella. They look over at him like, what is this guy doing here? Get out of the way. That has nothing to do with politics. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the sanctity of the sport. This sport is not an advertisement. That's not what it is. That's not what it should be. It's not a political commentary about Donald Trump. It's not his opportunity to sit on stage and have photos taken of him for 20 minutes. It's not what it is. There was a public outcry when Salt Bae was at the World Cup final, grabbing the trophy from the players. There was a public outcry for that, and that wasn't even on the stage. The most important moment of the entire tournament. The players lifting the trophy, you have the photos of the players elated, just absolutely reveling in this moment. They've won the first iteration of the biggest club tournament in the history of the sport. And right center of that is Donald Trump sitting there having no idea who these people are, having no clue. He couldn't name a single player on that roster. What is he doing in the very front and center row of this? Again, nothing to do with his politics. I don't care about that for right now. I have no reservations about that for this conversation. I don't care. That has nothing to do with it. But it is a mockery of the sport and everything that the sport is supposed to be about. And then we get on to the post-tournament press conference that Infantino held in the new FIFA headquarters at Trump Towers. So first off, the press conference was held in the lobby of Trump Towers because I guess they haven't fully set up their office or something like that, some excuse. And it was held in the lobby of Trump Towers. So every time there's this coffee shop in the lobby of Trump Tower, and every time that they would make a coffee, they literally had to stop talking so that, this coffee shop could do their job. So that was weird. You know, I'm willing to forego that. Of course, this is the new FIFA headquarters. It makes sense that they would host it here. But then we get on to the actual questions, and it's just like the whole time Infantino is dodging uncomfortable questions that have to do with some of the actual issues that may cause problems for the tournament going forward, and just gloating nonstop about the success of the tournament. And just completely, every time that a journalist would ask a question that even veered in the direction of there being any sort of talking about what the issues might be, how we're going to fix this problem, none of it was like violent or instigating. It was literally all just like, hey, are you concerned about player welfare? Like, are you concerned that the players aren't getting holidays and this might affect the long-term outlay of your sport as a whole? Because we're already seeing an uptick in injuries related to the overexertion of these athletes. It's unlike any other sport in the entire world. And he was just like, man, I just made so much money. Like, there was so much money. Like, how much money? Like, there was so much money. So much money. And then all the money that we made, and then he would turn around to his ambassadors and be like, yeah, didn't we just make we made a lot of money. And that was it. It was just him gloating about the success of the tournament. That was all it was. It was just Infantino's opportunity to have his Donald Trump moment and be the center of attention and talk about how much money he just made. And that was it. That was the whole press conference, was just Infantino being like, oh my God, like, this was amazing. Like, look at this idea that I had, this idea that was all mine that I came up with. There was nothing wrong with it. It was the perfect tournament. It's the biggest tournament in the world. I think that's something that he actually said. And man, I just made so much money. Like, there was so much money in this tournament. Can you guys believe how much money I just made? Like, and then he would turn around to his ambassadors like, you agree this was successful? Yeah, that was successful. And they would just sit there and nod their heads. Didn't have any word in edgewise. They would just sit there. Because they're, I don't think that his ambassadors are actually paid a certain amount of money, but they get certain like travel rights and they get opportunities to stay at these hotels. So like having your dogs behind you, the guys that you literally give free stuff to make sure that they agree with you, and so that nobody is getting out of line when they're asking you questions. It's just ridiculous. This whole tournament, again, apart from the actual football that was on display, was just an embarrassment. It's a mockery to the entire sport. And yeah, I'm probably overblowing it a little bit, and there's some people in my personal life that are going to be so upset with me for doing this on a podcast that's public information. But I have to get it out there, like, because it doesn't feel like anybody else in the American audience of football is going to do this. And it's frustrating, right? If you listen to the big football podcasts across the globe, there's some commentary in there about the issues with it, about the weird ad placement, about Infantino being, I don't want to go too far with this, but Infantino being Infantino, like, across the globe, there's that commentary aspect of it. But I can guarantee you, like, CBS, when there's finally a podcast episode about the culmination of the entirety of the Club World Cup, it's just going to be a bunch of retired USMNT players being like, man, the United States really knows how to put on a football tournament, don't they? Or they're going to call it soccer. Man, the United States really knows how to put on a soccer tournament, don't they? And that's going to be the whole thing. So consider me your bearer of bad news for this whole thing. If you're a casual fan of football and you don't know a lot of the stuff that I was talking about, please be sure to stay for the entire episode, because you're probably going to learn a thing or two here that you didn't maybe know before. So, yeah, I'm going to cut it a little bit short here because I'm probably just going to get more and more fired up as the episode goes on if I let myself. So again, if you're watching this on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. If you thought I was wrong about any of that, please leave a comment, because I will be happy to have a discussion with you about it. Follow me on all socials. I just started posting TikToks. That's FootyYurd, Footy Jurd. So go follow and like my recent post on there. If you're watching this on Spotify or listening to it, please give it please give it 5 stars, and please follow me on Spotify as well. My name is Jordan Fox. Have a good day.